This video is brought to you by Harold Sack, who gave me a massive 1 year's worth of subscriptions on Patreon. Ezuri versus Doretti. A 3-lander with 2 of our pieces of ramp that care about counters. Yeah, pretty good hand, if not a little bit slow, but we're after a little bit more of a casual game here. See a turn 1 gamble from Doretti. And discarded at random is a Foundry Inspector. They've got 4 cards left in hand over here. And we draw into a Bloated Contaminator, so maybe it's that on turn 3 instead of the ramp. A Sol Ring for the Doretti player, so I'm guessing that that's what he tutored for. Missing a land though, so he's going to need another land for the Doretti to come out. A Serum Snare for us. So maybe bouncing the Sol Ring back to hand so that we can keep the Doretti out of play is a good idea. We do have a means of proliferate in our hand, so yeah, let's go for that, try and buy ourselves a turn. Alright, unfortunately that was a waste of a card. Our opponent didn't get into a land anyway. So let's go in for the Bloated Contaminator, ready to swing in at Doretti. And obviously we can start proliferating with that. If we make a land next turn, then we'll be able to get into Ezuri and start drawing cards when this thing hits. Okay, our opponent drawing into a Cathartic Reunion. So we might have held our opponent off that, but with 6 cards in hand, still not getting into a land apparently, so yeah, maybe the bounce did do us some good in the end. Up against Skrelv this time, and that's a 1-lander, so we mulligan. Into a 2-lander with some ramp, so hopefully we'll be able to get something going there. Get rid of the Avenger, and we are on the play here. Do need to get into a blue or green source in order to be able to make coloured mana, but we need another land anyway, really. Turn 1 Skrelv from our opponent, as you would expect. And there is a Canker Bloom, which we can't play here, unfortunately. Got another chance to get into a land, though. And we take our first hit from our opponent's commander, so land 1 point of poison damage. And the curve's pretty perfect so far. A Skrelv's Hive. And alright, yeah, just to rub salt in the wound. Kept a bad hand, apparently. Sylvan Library we cannot play. So Skrelv's Hive triggering for the first time, making a 1/1 Toxic Might. Wow, and there's a Karn's Bastion as well, so our opponent has everything he needs. A Mana Vault as well. Yep, absolutely everything. A Skull Clamp onto the token, just to draw 2 cards, going back up to 6. And we'll take another Toxic hit. Alright, but we do manage to get into a land, thankfully, so it will have to be the Replicating Ring. We'll try and hold up mana. This can tap for a mana of any colour, thankfully, so we can go for the Hardened Scales as well. Seeing a War Room now from our opponent, and tapping down the Mana Vault this time. So that takes our opponent into a Grafted Exoskeleton, going on to the Skrelv, so we can get rid of their commander here if we want to blow up the Grafted Exoskeleton. I was hoping to go after the Skull Clamp, to be honest, but we take 4 poison damage to the damage there, and then 1 from the Toxic as well. So probably already gone too slow here. Alright, but there's a land, so that benefits us somewhat. Do we want mana or do we want the Sylvan Library here? I think we're best going for the mana at this point, to be honest. We'll get a Breeding Pool in Shocked and a basic Forest from the Sky Shroud Claim. And that will allow us into the Canker Bloom, so play that out here. And then we will pass through to our opponent's turn here. Try and make our opponent spend some more mana on trying to get the commander through. What they'll sort of have to do is swing straight through with the Skrelv, and then we can kill it in response, and that means that they don't have the chance to put this onto one of the Might tokens. We get the chance to block a Might this way as well. Alright, a Prosthetic Injector. They have absolutely everything they need. Pointed out in my Skrelv deck. This is looking very, very similar to my Skrelv deck. Because, well, it kind of builds itself, in all honesty. It's no skill of mine. But the Prosthetic Injector is going to stack Toxic on here, so that is Toxic 2 effectively. And the Skrelv's Hive is giving their stuff lifelink as well. They can't afford to replay their commander now. So swinging in with both things, we will block the Might token. And then in response to blocks, we will have our opponent pass priority to us. And then we can sacrifice this thing and destroy an artifact. So 2 birds with 1 stone, get rid of the exoskeleton. And that will kill off the Skrelv as well, taking it out of combat, of course. And they do benefit from the Skull Clamp there, because it has +1/-1 on it, so that obviously kills it off straight away. Would have died to the grafted exoskeleton anyway. Well, yeah, staying at 7 cards in hand thanks to that clamp. And they did drop a land, so they can get into their commander again straight away. But instead, going forward to Casey's welcome. And there is a Smell of Fear for us, so some more Proliferate available to us. I think we're best going for Garruk Primal Hunter here. We're 1 mana shy of going for the Nykthos, unfortunately, but we can get down the Sylvan Library, gives us some more devotion to green. And we'll obviously plus on the Garruk. So now they've got a choice of trying to outrace us with toxic damage, or they can go after the Garruk and try and keep us off potential card draw. Skrelv's Hive continuing to do great work with card draw, tied up with the Tacasia's Welcome. And a Sol Ring, absolutely god tier draws from my opponent this game. Don't think there's any shame in losing this one. Yep, a Sword of Feast and Famine, protection from green. And it's kind of like the deck is stacked, making us discard the Smell Fear, so we can't fight anything out of the way. Yep, so dealing 2 points of toxic damage to us, takes us to 9, and then Khan's Bastion finishes us off, so... yeah, Grafted Exoskeleton landing that damage really hurt us there, but I don't think there's any shame, like I said, in losing to all these incredible cards my opponent got into. We'll play another one. Up against Beirut this time, and yeah, pretty slow hand, but we've got the 2 pieces of ramp that care about counters again, so we will keep here. Turn 1 Elvish Mystic from Beirut. Okay, we get another 3-drop in the Bloated Contaminator, and we'll just pass at that. A Staff of Domination for Beirut. Okay, and a Nesting Grounds for us, so I think getting down the Nesting Grounds is fine, and the sooner we can start swinging in with Bloated Contaminator, the better. Don't have all that many means of Infect and Toxic and stuff in the deck, but this is obviously a really good one for Proliferation. And we can fight the Beirut out of the way if they play it down here. Noteworthy that our opponent has a Castle Garenbrig as well. So there we see Beirut Wormspeaker. And we draw into an island, so drop that straight away and going to attack in here. Doubt my opponent blocks. No blocks from the opponent, so they get a toxic counter, and then we proliferate, putting another one on there, so they have a poison counter to worry about for the rest of the game now. Let's get down some ramp in the form of Midnight Clock will be the best thing, I think. And then we'll go for Smell Fear. Have my creature fight your creature, and then we proliferate another poison counter over there. Get the first counter on the Midnight Clock. We need 12 of those, which would obviously be 6 turn cycles, but we hope to proliferate much faster than that. This is Pilgrimage from our opponent, means that they'll likely get the Beirut into play again next turn. And then they gained a life from the Staff of Domination, obviously not going to be blocking our creature here, so we'll likely get down our commander here, I think, see what we draw into first. Alright, speaking of card draw, there is a Garruk Primal Hunter. I think it's fine to just drop the Reliquary Tower and we'll go for Ezuri. Actually, it's more intelligent to go for the Replicating Ring first, so get that down and then we can get down our commander. Obviously can't pay the 3 into that, but we're about to proliferate when the Contaminator swings in. So proliferate the 5th poison counter over here, and then another counter onto the Midnight Clock. We don't have a counter on the Replicating Ring yet, that's only during our upkeep. We do draw a card here though, which is clearing a land off the top, so we've got a land to make next turn without wasting the Otawara. Tapping down the Castle Garenbrig for a 6-drop, which could be the commander again. Nope, it is an Engulfing Slagworm, so maybe it's worth the Otawara onto that. Replicating Ring gets its first counter, the Midnight Clock gets its 5th, and we draw into a forest. I think it's fine to get down the forest here. Play out the Garruk Primal Hunter, and then we'll go for Otawara, which will only cost us 3 mana, and we're just buying ourselves some time with this. Not going to activate the Garruk yet because I want to minus it down, but we'll have to proliferate first. So let's swing in at our opponent. And deciding to block with the Elvish Mystic onto this thing. This has trample, so not much point in doing that. Might as well block some commander damage, because our opponent should probably assume that we're going to have plus counter shenanigans in this deck. Anyway, hitting them for 6, proliferating onto them, making them 7 poison counters. We'll have Garruk survive the -3, and obviously put more counters on our ramp as well. Draw with Ezuri thanks to the Proliferate, but just get into another land, so we'll try again. Draw 4 thanks to the big 4 mana creature, or 4 powered creature I should say. And that draws us into a Sol Ring and a Serum Snare, which I'm sure will further annoy my opponent. So there we see the Engulfing Slagworm again. Another land in Hinterland Harbour for us. I think it's safe to go Yavimaya so that we can fix some of these colourless lands. Tick up on the Garrick we might as well. Play out the Sol Ring. And then we can't proliferate with this unless we bounce the Staff of Domination, but we might as well buy ourselves some time by bouncing this again, because it's likely they'll just replay it again. Plus we can continue to get the proliferate with this thing, so once again just buying ourselves some time. And yeah, that's enough to have our opponent scoop, so we swing in again, take them up to 7, 8, 9 points of Infect, and then likely activating this a few times. Yeah, we can only activate it a couple of times here, but it will be on 9, 10, 11, so ready for reshuffling during our next upkeep, and we'd have a fresh grip and hopefully be able to actually do something then. Managed to have the game last long enough though, thanks to the interaction, so we'll play another one, see if we can get a less one-sided game. Alright, third time up against this opponent, and he hasn't been able to get past 2 or 3 lands, so hopefully we'll get an actual real game this time. Gut and Agent of the Iron Throne. We're just going to have to nerf ourselves in order to actually be able to get a full game out. I really don't want to do that, but this hand's pretty slow. Let's mulligan. Okay, yeah, not going to mulligan any further than that. We will keep. Just a mountain from our opponent, we get into the Tangled Islet again on turn 1, and there we see a breeding pool, so try and get that in tapped at some point. It can just be the command tower, and we'll play the Incubation Druid. Alright, a basic forest for us, so I think we're fine to get down our commander here. Obviously not going to pay the activated or the triggered ability on it, but it's ready for Proliferate with Steady Progress next turn. So we'll draw 2 cards to that. Could even look at adapting with the Incubation Druid instead next turn before the Steady Progress. Depends on what our opponent does, of course. And we see Krenko, Tin Street Kingpin. They can't swing that into our Ezuri just yet. And we see a Contagion Engine ready for Proliferate on a stick, so yeah, it can just be a forest into adapting this thing, I think. We'll hold up the Steady Progress during our opponent's turn just in case, because we can adapt on our opponent's turn. Now it is a Goblin slide, so we're guessing that our opponent's gone for a Goblin deck. Managing to fix the black mana as well. And obviously not swinging in with Krenko, so go through to the end step, and we can go for the adapt onto the Incubation Druid, so 3+ counters on that. Only needs 1+ counter in order to tap for 3 mana instead of 1. Alright, and there's a Defiler of Vigour, which hadn't seen anywhere near enough play as far as I'm concerned, ever since it was released. Still don't think that thing's been discovered by people. Do we just go for, that's 3, 4, 5 and 6, only 2 mana. Yeah, let's bring that in tapped, and then we can go for the Contagion Engine for the sake of mana efficiency here. So a minus counter on all of our opponent's stuff, which is obviously just 1 creature at the moment. Argument to be made for keeping hold of this until our opponent gets a bunch of tokens into play. Our opponent could obviously negate the minus counter on this by swinging in with Krenko, but that would just take it back to where it started. And we can proliferate twice by tapping this and paying 4, so hoping that'll do some work for us, especially with Defiler of Vigour in play. Bogart shenanigans now. They can put 1 mana into that to make a Goblin, looks like they are doing, and then not swing it in as you would expect. Okay, there's an Otawara. I think the Otawara is going to be more use to us than Boseiju, so we'll play Boseiju out as a land this turn. And we'll play out the Defiler of Vigour, ready to play creatures into that, so that we can start putting plus counters on all of our stuff. Yeah, just holding up on our opponent's turn. We can afford to proliferate twice with Contagion Engine, and we can hold up Otawara and the Steady Progress. Might as well swing in with the Ezuri because we've got the Defiler back as a blocker. And now it is Electric Revelation, so could make another Goblin here, discarding a Warbreak Trumpeter. They are making a Goblin token. Alright, and at the end of the turn we might as well go for the Contagion Engine here, proliferates us twice. So it's pretty much the same as doing Steady Progress with regards to card draw. Get rid of the Krenko, put another plus counter, or 2+ counters on the Incubation Druid. And then the Bogart shenanigans going to trigger when the creature dies. We draw into Tekethal, and Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth, so got a land to make this turn at least. Okay, and draw into an island anyway. So yeah, a little bit shy on blue mana compared to green mana, so drop the island. And again, we're just looking to do stuff during our opponent's turn. Tekethal with the Contagion Engine is going to be pretty rough for our opponent. Swing in with some bigger creatures now. Ezuri, a 3/3 and a 6/6 Trampling Defiler. Noteworthy that the Defiler only triggers on green creatures, so didn't get the benefit of casting the Tekethal into that. Our opponent's making the lands this time, but still only 1 black mana, so could be that he's got a Damnation in hand that he can't cast. Alright, a Bogart Birthright, and that returns Krenko to the hand for 1 black mana, so it's likely that our opponent can get down the Krenko again here. Instead it is Goblin Assassin, and that's not one we want to see really. So why don't we tap this down for mana while we've got the chance, and we can proliferate with the mana, proliferate onto the Incubation Druid, and proliferate again, and a 3rd time, and a 4th time of course, because Tekethal sees that we're proliferating twice, so makes it 4 times, and we would have drawn 4 cards there. And yeah, our opponent's scooping didn't necessarily have anything to worry about. Could have started putting plus counters on the Scavenging Goose. The Merfolk Skydiver usually puts plus counters on itself, so starting to have more things to proliferate, but of course these are green creatures, so we put plus counters on all of our creatures with Defiler of Vigor. But yeah, weren't getting into a means of dealing with this. Likely would have bounced that during my next turn and got this smaller stuff out. Still not satisfied with the games I'm playing here, so try yet again. Alright, up against Maelstrom Wanderer, and we do have fast mana in hand, but no land. Okay, and absolutely no ramp in that hand, but could maybe counter something dangerous with this. We will try that, get out the Hardened Scales on turn 1, and if we don't have a turn 2 play next turn, we can go for a tap land with the Polluted Delta. Sensei's Divining Top from our opponent. Okay, a Replicating Ring is nice. If we can get into a 3rd land next turn, that would be the play that we'd like to make. No Spin of the Top on turn 1, which suggests that our opponent already has a play he would like to make, but passing straight through the turn here suggests otherwise. So really hoping for a land here. We do get into ramp, but nowhere near it thanks to the lack of mana, so the last thing you want to have is a lack of mana against a Maelstrom Wanderer player. Just need to hope that there's nothing relevant on the top 3 cards here. Got all 3 of his colours and into Kodama's reach though, so the ramp begins into the Maelstrom Wanderer. Yeah, and still no land for us. We can get the Thrumming Bird going at least, but we're already 2 lands behind. So not likely we're going to do anything this game. And then we see Grim Monolith from our opponent into the Rhythm of the Wild. I don't think I've got a single counter spell in this deck, so not too worried about that. Alright, our opponent's just got way too far ahead of us here. We're on 2 mana to his 10 or whatever he's got, so call it a day here. I think we've seen Maelstrom Wanderer plenty on the channel thanks to all the times I've played it. Alright, if our opponent wants to be a dick like that, then let's see who the easy one is. Bad hand, just a 1-lander, and there we go, get into exactly what we need here, so keep that, get rid of... yeah, it'll have to be the Abrade, unfortunately. And if we want to go for the turn 2 Distress, then we'll have to put red mana through a Graven Cairns, so get down the tap land. Our opponent throws out a tap land as well. Alright, and there is a generous gift for us, so definitely go for the Graven Cairns, like I said, and into the Distress on my opponent. And our opponent scoops, of course, so an absolute hypocrite. Up against Thassa Deep Dwelling this time, and yeah, got a decent amount of mana there, so definitely try this one. Turn 1 Sol Ring, ready for the Astral Cornucopia next turn. Argument to be made for waiting on the Sol Ring on turn 1, because we can still get both out on turn 2, but not punished here against a blue player anyway. So it's Tropical Island. And obviously X is 1 on the Cornucopia here, so yeah, we do have something to proliferate here. Likely just getting into Vivian next turn though. Okay, let's see if our opponent has a counter spell against the Vivian. Tried to drop the Vivian, Monster's Advocate. And yep, does have a counter spell, so we will aim for getting into our commander next turn. And we can afford to play it for 7 mana and proliferate onto the cornucopia. Unless our opponent is just play a land and pass. Apparently not. A Stern Proctor. Return an artifact or enchantment to its owner's hand. Alright, looks like we're just replaying the Astral Cornucopia next turn. Or the Sol Ring, that's fine, that's easy enough to replay. Does mean that we can't afford the 7 on Ezuri though. So instead, do we just play Displacer Kitten without the Sol Ring? Yeah, I don't think there's much point in that. We'll just play out the Sol Ring here and pass over to our opponent. Displacer Kitten is here to flicker our commander so that we can proliferate multiple times. Our opponent has all of the interaction though apparently, rapid hybridization going on to that. And then we see a Pilgrim's Eye. And yeah, just another land for us unfortunately, so drop the land into Ezuri. And we're only proliferating onto the cornucopia, but we'll do that twice. So drawing 2 cards, two of which are lands, so glad to clear them off the top at least. Let's swing in with this Frog Lizard token. Thassa Deep Dwelling into play now with a Stern Proctor, so yeah, can continue to bounce our stuff, likely the Astral Cornucopia. So that does take us down on mana, and alright, a Rishkar's Expertise. Would be nice to get some plus counter stuff going. Just drop the island here, and I think we'll replay the Cornucopia, and then we can afford the Rishkar's Expertise, and hopefully draw into something off the top 3. At the very least we're clearing 3 cards off the top, but certainly not the best Rishkar's Expertise we could hope for. And there is a Fathom Mage. Yeah, that's definitely the one we go for here. Not worthy that we drew into an Ugin as well, so worst case scenario we can just go for that next turn. Definitely swing in with everything. And they do not block, so 31 points of life, and they draw up to their 4th card this turn. It is Scry 2 and draw off a Preordain. And now we see a Panharmonicon, which is not what we want to see. Thankfully we're dealing with the Stern this turn, so that will bounce both of our rocks. And we draw into a Scavenging Ooze, so that will evolve the Fathom Mage. Let's go for the Nykthos into the Sol Ring. And we can't go for the Cornucopia and the Ugin, so we'll just drop Ugin the Spirit Dragon here, especially while our opponent is down on mana. And then we definitely plus Lightning Bolt onto the Stern Proctor. They'll need another ETB effect to make use of all this stuff they got going. And then swinging in for 6 again, we can't block the flying creature anyway. A Mystic Sanctuary from our opponent, so can put an instant on top of the library. And they chose the Preordain there, but chose not to put it on top of their library. And instead deciding on an Aether Adept. So bouncing our commander and the Fathom Mage. Luckily we can still bolt this thing. So yeah, that is exactly what we needed against our opponent to break everything that they're doing. We can just bolt this thing out of the way, replay our Ezuri and the Fathom Mage next turn. Likely draw some more cards in the process. Yeah, weren't getting into anything too crazy. The Mesmerizing Dose isn't excellent against a Flicker deck, but we could get a 3 mana Proliferate out of it at least. Up against Molu this time with a pretty poor hand. The plants from the Nissa aren't going to be all that relevant against a Trampler, so try and mulligan that and actually get into some ramp. And we do see ramp here, so keep that. And I think I'd rather just get rid of the Hardened Scales out of that hand. We are on the draw. And we draw into another land, which is what we seem to be doing a lot of in this deck. So I'll just get down a tap land here. A Fleet Feather Sandals for our opponent, flying in haste for an equip for 2. And we get into our first Proliferate spell in Steady Progress. Yeah, I think we're fine just getting down our commander here for the sake of mana efficiency. And the Vivian Monster's Advocate can come down next turn. Could play this into Vivian. Play our commander into it, but yeah, I think I'm fine just making creatures with that. We're going to need Reachers anyway against the Molu. Alright, a Nature's Law for us, which potentially too late here. Can we do this? No, we have to tap out into the Vivian here, so we'll save the ramp spell for a little bit later. Play out the Vivian. Okay, there's an Incubation Druid on top of our library, which we could play if we had the surplus mana. I will plus make a Beast token with Reach, and then we can swing in at our opponent for 3 commander damage. Seeing a Rogue's Passage from our opponent, so argument to be made for Beast Within going onto this instead of the Fleet Feather Sandals. At least we've got Reachers at the moment to negate the Fleet Feather Sandals. Lose the flip to Mana Crypt. Okay, and we see a Defiler of Vigor on top, which could be useful to us. Go for Waterlogged Grove, and yeah, I think we will go for the creature on top here. And then we see a Gaia Sage as well, so yeah, Gaia Sage could be useful as well. Let's plus on the Vivian, make another Reacher, so we can double block on this thing quite nicely at this point. And yeah, just drop the Gaia Sage, I think. Obviously there's Phyrexian mana being paid into this, thanks to the Defiler of Vigor. Oof, and there's a Vorinclex on top as well. So it's a plus counter going on all of our stuff thanks to the green Gaia Sage being cast. And that makes our tokens way better as well, of course, so swing in with the Ezuri. Alright, our opponent can afford to activate the Rogue's Passage now, thanks to the 4th basic. Can't quite get rid of the Vivian though. Alright, there's a Snakeskin Veil from our opponent, so this thing jumps up to a 5/5 with Hexproof, Vigilance and Trample. Might soon have Flying as well, hopefully the Vivian will continue to hold this thing back. Okay, there was an Ancient Animus, so getting rid of our Ezuri, I'm not really all that bothered about that, to be honest, because it's one of our only means of proliferation so far. And then can still put Flying on the Molu, so that is a 7/7 now, 3 cards left in hand. And we can double block if they swing in, although we won't need to. They've got 4 damage markers on this, don't forget. Well, we can't stop revealing green creatures off the top. This is really, really lucky, so let's see here. Let's put a couple of life into the Sakura Tribe Elder and a generic mana as well. I suppose I should have plussed on the Vivian before this to maximise plus counters. I'll do that now, make another Reacher. That will evolve the Gaia Sage. So this thing will now tap for 2 mana. Let's go for the Vorinclex. Put 2 life into it again. Plus counter on all of our stuff again with the Defiler of Vigor. And the Gaia Sage evolves again, so that is 5 plus counters on this thing, so we can go for... yeah, we can shuffle away the Everflowing Chalice, I think is fine. We'll do that first, just in case we see something on top that we like again, or luck might continue. Get a Tropical Island with that. Alright, and there we see Nissa Who Shakes the World. Don't mind getting into that next turn. So we'll just throw down the Incubation Druid. Not much point in putting the life into it. Trigger the Defiler of Vigor again. And then this thing can get a plus counter on it when we play our commander. Don't necessarily have to pay the adapt cost. And now our opponent can get rid of the Vivian next turn, but we'll force them to tap out into the Rogue's Passage in order to do that. Swing in with 1/8/8 Reacher, an 11/11 Trample, and an 8/8 Vorinclex with Trample. Very much encouraging my opponent to block here, but they decide not to. Okay, during this play session you've literally seen every game I played, and yeah, well, as you know on this channel by now, it's very difficult to get into 4 games on Magic Online, so we'll leave it there, and hopefully you all enjoy the Ezuri Proliferate deck. If you want to see more from it, then I'll continue to try and get games, but I guarantee nothing. I'm tribalkai. Thank you for watching.